Good morning, everybody. My name is Sue Duke, and I work on public policy issues across Europe for LinkedIn. I thought what might be useful for today's discussion is first to give you a very brief introduction to LinkedIn and what it does, then talk about how LinkedIn is using big data in the labor market, and then talk a little bit about how this might apply to cities in similar ways that Kieran was discussing. So, first off, can you guys see that if I... Yeah. First off, very quick introduction to LinkedIn. So you could all be like I was until I joined LinkedIn a couple of months ago. And think of LinkedIn as somewhere you go purely when you're looking for a job. But actually, LinkedIn is about much more than online CVs. At its most basic level, what LinkedIn is an online platform that uses data to help members in three particular areas. The first is identity. So many of you may be aware of the LinkedIn profile or may even have a LinkedIn profile, and so you know that's about creating and communicating your professional identity. The second is networks. We help members create their professional network and communicate with one another, with companies, with universities, and with professional groups. And the third is knowledge. More and more people are using LinkedIn as a place to share, create, consume professional content about their working lives. That's at a very, very high level what LinkedIn does for individual members. But what's of much more relevance for today is to think about that not as at an individual level, but what happens when we put all of those identities, all of those networks, and all of that knowledge together into one place and step back and take a look at it at a macro level. Basically, what happens when this data gets big? I'm sure everybody has heard a little bit about big data, and everyone gets a bit scared about it, just like me, because after a couple of years working in this industry, it's still grossly unclear to me exactly what it is and what it does. What I have worked out over the past couple of years is that there are basically three major trends that have surfaced over the past 10 to 15 years that allow us to do calculations at a scale and level of complexity today that we could never do before. The first of these is storage. So as you can see there, I hope you can see there, the cost of storing data has fallen exponentially. The second is computing power. So you hear this Moore's law being bandied around a bit. And basically, what that's talking about is computing power has grown exponentially, and the cost of that power has fallen at an inversely proportional rate. And the third is bandwidth availability. So you can see, just like storage and just like computing power, the availability has gone in one direction and the cost has gone in the other. These three trends have come together and resulted in a massive production of data over the past 10 years. And I'm sure everybody goes through their day and knows that they consume a lot of data and they might even generate a lot of data. This slide here just zooms in on one particular category of data, which is photos. And you can see there, over the last 9 years, the growth in the number of photos that are uploaded and shared across various platforms. And you can see the growth is just phenomenal, and that's just photos. What all of this, the growth in this data and the generation of this data has basically allowed companies to build what we call graphs, which show things that are happening in the world today that we couldn't see before. So you hear a lot of companies in the digital space talk about graphs. You hear Facebook, they talk about their social graph. Twitter talk about an interest graph. LinkedIn talks about a professional graph. And very simply, what everybody is doing when they talk about those graphs is it's just a network of nodes. So you have a node over here, let's say a person. There's another node over here, another person. And there's a line that connects the two. Then a third node comes and a line connects back to the other two nodes, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth. And as this thing grows, you end up with a three-dimensional object that allows you to see and quantify the connections between those nodes in a way we couldn't see before, not least of which is the formation of human relationships. This visual here represents every employee in LinkedIn today and how they network and communicate with one another. So you'll see, for example, the analytics guys, not a shocker, they're right in the middle. It's a data company, so obviously everybody feeds off and feeds into the analytics guys. Up here, you have the sales guys clustered quite closely together, first at a geographical level and then at a functional level. And then you see legal and compliance, where I sit over here, complete desperados out on the side because nobody wants to talk to us or to be our friends. What LinkedIn wants to do is, that's obviously at a company level. What we want to do over the next 10 years is do that for the wider economy. Basically, what we want to do is create an economic graph. Sorry, guys. The economic graph is basically a digital map of the labor force, of the labor market, so that the connections between jobs and companies and people can be brought to life in a way that economists haven't been able to do before. Just like all of the other graphs, it'll be a network of nodes. In this instance, for the economic graph, there are basically 6 nodes. The first is people, the second is companies, the third is jobs, the fourth is skills, the fifth is universities, and the sixth is updates, which is knowledge, basically. We then want to bring all of those 6 dimensions into one place and try and understand and facilitate the connections between them. As our membership grows, obviously the connections between those nodes will get more numerous and we think much more useful. So those 6 nodes, we think that when you trace the connections between, say, people, companies, and jobs, you'll end up with this 3-dimensional thing emerging again, which shows you how they're interacting with one another and what are the dynamics between them. Thank you. By bringing all this information together, we think that it will result in a step change improvement in how policymakers and city planners look at the economy and the kind of information that they can pull in real time, and as a result, the kind of interventions they can plan in reaction to it. One of the reasons we think that this will be useful is because policymakers don't have the tools today that allow them to do this kind of in-depth analysis. So the 2 main economic indicators that we use today, the unemployment rate and gross domestic product, were both created back in the 1930s in response to the Great Depression. They've changed a bit, they've improved incrementally over that time, but fundamentally they haven't changed, despite the fact, as we all know, the economy that they're trying to measure has changed radically. And as a result, they're far too blunt to capture the kind of highly networked, highly knowledge-intensive economy that we have today. For example, we have a situation in Europe today where on the one hand we have 24 million people unemployed, and on the other we have 1.7 million vacancies that we can't fill. Likewise, here in Ireland we have 11% unemployment, and just in the tech sector we have about 6,000 jobs that go unfilled because we can't recruit the talent to fill them. We think LinkedIn can help on both of those counts. Firstly, part of the solution lies in generating more data and creating more efficient tools so that the right people can be matched with the right jobs. This kind of data would allow policymakers to remove friction from the marketplace so that capital, all forms of capital, be it intellectual, working, human, could flow freely from where it sits at the moment to where it's required, to where it's needed. Secondly, we think this kind of data can help us see in a more detailed, holistic way what are the skills we need that we don't have, and we can then leverage technology to upskill people for the jobs that are out there. By looking at the labor market, not in one dimension, i.e. the unemployment rate, and not at a lag, so as you know, the unemployment figures usually come out 3 months or so after the fact, but by looking at it rather in this 6-dimensional form, looking at the changes in those dimensions and the interactions between them, we think policymakers will get a much more comprehensive, richer view of what's happening in the labor market and be able to respond accordingly. Let's have a look at how this might apply to cities. So as Kieran was highlighting, we can characterize a city and quantify a city's potential in lots of different ways, by architecture, geography, population, culture, etc. What this kind of data would do is to allow us to quantify a city's potential according to its skills. So as I said earlier, people define themselves on LinkedIn based on their skills. What that allows us to do is to group people into categories based on their skills, and then take a step back and see what's happening at within a certain skills category in a certain city. So we looked at 9 cities across Europe to see how they're doing in computer science skills. Fortunately, Dublin isn't included in this, but I have some data on Ireland that I'll get to in a second. This data is particularly timely and relevant for governments across Europe at the moment because, as we know, because Dublin is one of them, there's a number of cities across Europe who are vying to become the tech startup of Europe, the startup capital of Europe. They all face a common problem. They just simply cannot get enough talent in to feed the demand. And as a result, they're all basically competing for the same small pool of talent. What this data, as you can see, allows them to do is see just where they are vis-a-vis other cities. Obviously, this is just a snapshot in time. This is just is a snapshot of where they are at the moment. But over time, they can map what kind of changes are happening in their skills profile, and as a result, identify and respond to migration trends. So you can see here, using this data, we were able to map out supply and demand for computer science skills in those 9 cities. You'll see London is doing fairly well, very high demand, very high supply. But one that does stand out there is Copenhagen. So quite low demand for computer science skills in Copenhagen, but quite high supply. And you can immediately imagine why that might be useful to, for example, a company who's looking to set up somewhere where there's a rich supply of computer science skills, or indeed a government who's looking to get people with computer science skills into their country to bridge a skills gap. So we did something like using this kind of data. We worked with the city of Chicago, and this will give you some sense of how this works in practice. So Chicago has quite a big tech sector, but they face exactly the same problem that all of those cities face. They just can't get enough people in to grow the tech industry that they have there. So we worked with them over, say, the last number of months, using exactly that kind of data to get them to help them to understand where they are now and where they want to get to. So again, drilling down into that data, they were able to see that within the state, they basically have a set of people over here who are unemployed or underemployed, a set of companies over here who have roles that they can't fill, and right in the middle of their community, they have educational institutions that could provide those people with the skills to fill those jobs. And that's exactly what they've done. So again, very much using the data, they're working with the universities in their community to roll out skills programs that will help these people get the jobs over here. The second problem they had was just losing talent. So again, looking at LinkedIn data, they were able to see that just last year they lost 8,000 recently software engineers who'd recently graduated out of universities in Illinois. They're able to see roughly where they're going and what kind of sectors they're going into. And in reaction to this, they've now rolled out a recruitment program across these states in those sectors to try and get that talent to come back into Illinois. And secondly, they've introduced a retention program into the universities to try and make sure that the grads don't leave in the first place. Finally, a quick look at Ireland. This is just a snapshot of some data to give you a flavor of what kind of data is coming out of Ireland and what we might be able to use it for. So Ireland is one of LinkedIn's most vibrant marketplaces. We have 1.2 million members out of a workforce, as you know, of about 2.2 million. Within that 1.2 million, obviously there's huge diversity ranging from the sort of newfangled data scientist roles right through to the more traditional Irish vocations, including the 53 poets and the 3 leprechauns we have on LinkedIn today. Less surprising, maybe, is that the sector most represented on LinkedIn is the tech sector, followed by the construction sector, which may or may not be surprising, followed by financial services. This is a report that we did last year that looks at migration of talent around the world. You can see here that Ireland is more or less flat, we had about 17,000 people who came in to start a job and about 18,000 people who left to start a new job. Just to be clear, we're obviously not talking about net emigration or immigration. This is very specifically people who came to take up an opportunity and people who left to take up an opportunity. Let's have a look at, firstly, who's coming into Ireland and what skills are they bringing with them. So as you can see from here, the majority of people coming into Ireland to take up a job are coming from Europe, although the US is heavily represented. Just as importantly, what skills are they bringing with them? Ireland is attracting in a high net inflow of people with IT skills. That's extremely encouraging and extremely relevant because, as we were saying, Dublin is one of those cities who's trying to be this tech startup capital of Europe, and getting in people with those skills is extremely important. You can see here on the left side a breakdown of the kind of skills they're bringing in, so very much focused on programming, and over here where they're coming from. But we're also losing talent, so where are people going? Again, the vast majority are going to Europe, although again you see the US is heavily represented there. What skills are we losing? Interestingly, Ireland is losing a lot of people with marketing skills, and in particular digital marketing skills. So again, here you see the breakdown of the skills that people are leaving with, and a breakdown here of where they're going. So again, we see the UK and the US heavily represented. That's just, as I say, a snapshot of some of the kind of data that we can pull for Ireland. But again, you can immediately see how that could help policymakers understand in a real-time and holistic way what's happening in the marketplace, and then tailor either workforce interventions, immigration policies, or education policies in response to it. That's at a country level. We had a quick look at a city level, but we can take a step back further and have a look at this kind of data at a regional or even at a global level. We can use this data, again, bringing it up a level to see what kind of migration trends are emerging across the globe. And so I'm going to leave you with this slide, which is the migration of LinkedIn members with STEM skills, so science, technology, engineering, and math skills, all over the world in the 12 months up to March 2014. A couple of things jump out at you immediately. So you see India here, interestingly, traditionally an awful lot of tech skills, of people with tech skills leave India and go to the Western world to bridge the kind of skills gap we've been talking about. But interestingly, you'll see a net inflow back into India, and this is something we're seeing over the last 12 to 18 months, where people are either returning to India or going to India to work in the tech sector there. Again, you can see lots of other trends that would be interesting. But I know I'm tight on time, so I hope this kind of a slide and some of the examples that I discussed earlier give you some sense of how we think this kind of data could help policymakers monitor and plan and better manage their economies. Thank you.